want to say a few words about this particular panel, the ease of doing business. At the Securities Commission Public Companies Forum last month, the PM noted that the Bahamas is ranked 118th out of 190 countries in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. Now that puts us ahead, this is Mr. Lancy. That puts us ahead, behind, not ahead, sorry, behind countries such as Palestine, Honduras. Honduras has the highest murder rate in the world. Kenya and Jamaica and Colombia. That should tell us something. The national rankings by the World Bank are based on 10 sub-indices. And indices such as starting a business, how easy is it, getting credit, protecting investors, paying taxes, and what have you. But I think with the panelists that we have, I think we're going to focus on two very important aspects of these two indices, and they are dealing with construction permits and getting electricity. And I think the other indices is probably for another panel, but I'm going to focus on that. So I'm going to just go ahead and ask my panelists. We've given them some questions, and I want to start out by asking each of them, and I want to slightly change one of the questions from our representative from BPL. Question, I'll start with Mr. Zornical and move on down the panel, Mr. Lancy, Mrs. Alston, and of course, Adrian. The question is, are you satisfied with the state of construction approvals in the Bahamas? And I want to slightly change the question slightly for the BPL representative. Are you satisfied with the service and the performance of BPL as it relates to dealing with investors and assisting them with being able to provide the electricity they require? So with that, Mr. Zornical.
That's not an easy question. I'll tell you why. I deal with subdivisions. A bit. Provision of electrical services. We have not a few subdivisions that were supposedly developed but weren't. Lots were sold. Over the years, we would have said, do not issue any building permits. But we have a town planning committee that decides on building permit applications. And if they so choose, they would approve something. Let me give an example. Nassau Village, Pinewood Gardens. You do realize that Nassau Village and Pinewood Gardens overlap.
Okay.
That is a recipe for disaster. A committee comes in, grants approval, say, oh, let the people build. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're gone in 5 or 10 years, but we're left trying to make sense out of nonsense.
Oh, boy.
That is an example. That's why I said it's not as simple as you think. Mm-hmm. I just spoke to Mr. Ferguson. We have a subdivision in his name, Ferguson Terrace. Lots sold from in the 60s. Mr. Baisden is here. He knows the horror stories. Lots are sold. People want to build. We're cold-hearted technocrats. The town planning committee, they're appointed by whom? And they have a totally different outlook, and they may know more facts than we do. And they decide to give approvals. BEC now has to BPL has to now figure out how to provide electrical services to this structure. Folk now have what, $12,000 to $15,000 bill? So it's not as simple an issue as one may think. We do our best, but we have many abnormal and odd and awkward situations. I hope I'm speaking to you in honesty. I'm trying to be frank, but I don't want to end up on the front page or the second page.
Can I ask you can I ask a follow-up question? I'd like to ask a follow-up. Presumably, there is a process. Is there a documented process by which it's required for somebody who wants to do the development, who wants to do build a building that they must follow? Because processes, standardized process, well, the idea is with processes to cut through, to reduce or eliminate the very situation you indicated.
We live in the Bahamas.
So I think I would like to answer that. So when dealing with investors, there is a sense of entitlement that they bring to the table. So I'm new here. I've been with the corporation about a year. And one of the very first jobs that I was called on was, I'm not going to call names, but was an investor who had built a very large building and was really giving grief to the BPL personnel on why he could not do what he wanted to do. And in my previous life, where I had done a lot of transmission and distribution planning, I decided to go on the job site myself. And there was a sense of entitlement. There was a sense that I'm investing this money and I should be able to do what I want to do. And from that, it was very clear that the individual had wanted to go to a mass meter setup that they had not applied for with the Ministry of Works. They had not had their documentation and process in place for their approval for their elevator. There were all of these things that the investor knew that they were supposed to have, but they almost tried to strong-arm us into acquiescing and getting the service that they wanted. So there is sometimes, when dealing with the investors, a sense of entitlement.
Well, question on that, sorry. Okay, the investor, well, they're obviously being empowered by somebody or some group. Who is empowering them?
That's another wicked question. That's a wicked question. You want to take it?
So I think that, right, that, I don't think that that's a question that we here at the table can answer. I think the question that we can answer is what can be our response. From a BPL position, I think you initially asked, am I personally satisfied with how we interact with investors? And that's really a relationship of reciprocity. Often is the case, and I think probably Mr. Basin can speak to how many miles it is. You know, from a protectorate type of position, BPL was on the hook. I want to say, is it 17 miles of transmission we built in Exuma, and the investor never actually built what he was supposed to. You know, then the question is, who bears that cost? And so from a BPL perspective, I'm not 100% satisfied with our responses, but we are putting things in place to make sure that we are expeditious in providing those responses. But we do have to make sure that we protect all of the Bahamian public from investors who say, I'm going to do this and you must build this, and then we get there and then they evaporate.
Thank you. Last.
I got a question.
Oh, go ahead.
In relation to, I know the top lining act is a lot, I suppose it's been updated in some respect, and is a lot better in certain securities that's asked of the developers to hopefully ensure that they do complete what they initially planned. I mean, that still exists in
Yes,
principle, right?
yes.
Developers have to provide securities and bonds in relation to putting in the relevant infrastructure.
Yes.
Obviously, I'm seeing, as an architect, I see persons coming with developments in large development like in Exuma, right?
Mhm.
3,000 lots or whatever the case may be, and no infrastructure. Significantly deep within the development, and now, you know, we have to be very creative in creating technically homes that are as self-sustaining as possible, because it would cost them a mint to get the local infrastructure to their particular home, right? So in those scenarios, does the town planning have any provision, if the developer is still involved, if he still owns certain assets within that development, has the power to let's say, I don't know, whether you can address those assets to force the developer to now, is the new act retroactive in any way to now have these developers start to fulfill some type of infrastructure improvement or not?
We're talking about
Existing
development.
large existing developments where there's really not much infrastructure that was put in, but lots were sold.
Exuma Sound is a prime example of it. Hundreds of lots, thousands of lots, approved in the 60s with the understanding that you're going to use a generator. The road is white-topped. Lots are sold. You can't withdraw an approval. And it's also hemmed in any possibility of settlement expansion in some instances. We're faced with these decisions that were made in the 60s that still haunt us today. We do our best. The corporations seek to, I guess, prorate the cost of doing certain things. BPL is one of the easier, I'm speaking as a layman now, from my humble perspective, one of the easier utilities. Water and sewer, absolutely non-existent. And folk are talking about utilizing groundwater.
Well, Mr. Zorniger, as a follow-up question in regards to retroactivity, does the government ever consider that the possibility in certain circumstances where imposing retroactively current requirements because of the public good? I mean, there's certain circumstances where I think retroactively enforcing regulations is very important, and perhaps this presents an opportunity here. You said 60s, but you know that's 40, 50 years ago.
Like I said, you can't withdraw an approval. Sometimes they would indicate that if a request is made to put in utilities, that the lot owners are aware of that upfront and that they would be asked to contribute. That's well and good on paper, but the reality is I don't see it enforced.
I got to talk about that a little bit. Even in Nassau, where you have that situation where I'm also a contractor,
Yeah.
and an electrical contractor, and I've had clients who are, again, I'm not picking on BPL, who has been expected and have imposed. They have been required, in order to get electricity to their home, have to pay for a substantial portion of the infrastructure in a development, prominent development that was never in place to begin with. Not only for their benefit, but for the benefits of people who, homeowners who haven't built yet. Now, and we're not talking, you know, we're talking in certain circumstances, I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Otherwise, they would not get electricity.
Is it,
You know,
go ahead. Is it a matter of the bond still being in place, where the developer hasn't completed their infrastructural installation?
Well, this development, I'm thinking, I'm not gonna mention.
No, don't mention it.
It's been here for decades. It's been around for decades, and it just seems to me I deal with these people all the time, and you know they seemingly don't have anybody to complain to, and all I tell them is, you have to bite the bullet, and if you want electricity in your home, you pay the bill. You know, it seems unfair, especially for a foreigner who is coming here to invest money. It's just something they're not expecting.
So I'll have to disagree on that. So I come from a rural electrification background. So I was a part of the rural utility service for probably the last 20 years. And when you look at the Bahamas and you look at electrifying the archipelago, the challenge is if you do not have a cost to native construction and you spread those costs, then are you not then spreading those costs amongst individuals who've already paid into the system? I mean, that is really the question that has plagued rural electrification for years. I think what we have is when you have the first person in the area, and it speaks to if it was a development, and you're the first person in the development, then it does seem unfair. But if the entire development was structured in a way where those costs should have been shared amongst all of the lot owners, then those costs would have stayed with the original developer. So from an investor standpoint, we hear this a lot. They're saying, well, I don't feel like I should have to bear those initial costs. But then is the proposal that we spread all of those costs amongst all of the ratepayers. And that's the quandary of any service, whether we provide it or you go to the United States. It is the same thing. When rural areas are developed, the first person on the line, it's quite common where they pay that initial amount.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
Because what has always been in place is that they may make a partial payment, knowing that others would come along in the event it's prorated, or if they have to pay the full cost, then if anyone connects within the specified period of time, then they would get a percentage of the money back in terms of refund, right? The other aspect of it as well is when you develop a subdivision on the state and you say it's 5 kW per lot, but now the person comes in and they say they want, 150, 200, even more. There again, it's something that they need to pay for as well. And the other aspect is too often they compare the costs in the U.S., which is a totally different tariff structure, pricing structure, et cetera, to what their expectations are here.
Mr. Basin brings up a really good point that I wanted to kind of expand upon as well, is that when you're looking at the cost, because we do take it very seriously how we go about actually calculating what that investment is for the customer. The thing that what we are finding is many times people will come in and to his point they will say, I need 5 kW service. And you go out there and you say, well, what is the panel rated for? Well, the panel may only be rated for 2 kW. So how is it that you need 5 kW service if the panel is only rated for 2 kW? And so then you have to wonder, well, is someone oversizing the panel? Are you looking for future growth? Is there another panel coming? And we see that quite often, and we're not here to contradict the electrical contractor or the electrician, but we charge based on what is submitted to BPL. So there is something there to be cognizant about.
Thank you. Mr. Delancey?
Good afternoon. The question was whether we are satisfied with the current building permit process. Today, I am not satisfied with the current process in hand, but that has been affected by several different issues. Number one, our staffing has been reduced drastically in the last year based on retirements and non-replacements. So that is an area that we've been trying to improve on to try and bring us back up to an average whereby we can deal with building permits on a more timely basis. The other issue with that is that the few inspectors that we have now, they are doing more than their regular duties. They are doing triple duties because we also are building inspectors who are the ones who really carry out the review of building permits. They are plagued with having to carry out business licensing inspections now, which was just recently mandated in the early part of this year, whereby we're trying to help the customers to have their places inspected within 48 hours. So we're trying to reduce that time. We've been given a mandate by the Ministry of Finance to try and improve our business license regime. And so that's an area that has been impacting our inspectors and how much attention they pay to dealing with building permits. The other thing is the hotel inspections. That's another area that my inspectors have to play an important role in carrying out for hotel licensing. And that covers all of the Bahamas, not only in New Province, all the Family Islands. And normally, the Family Islands, in January, that process starts whereby we have to send inspectors out to assist the hotel licensing section with that. So with those additional duties, it does sort of detracted from the few officers concentrating on the plan approval process. One of the other issues that queries at the current state now, we used to, when we have queries with building permits, we used to send them out in the mail. As you all know, the mail system is pretty much non-functional. So that has been an area whereby we relied on the architects and engineers and homeowners to inquire to find out what's going on with their applications. So in trying to remedy that, we've instituted now an email process whereby we'll be sending out queries by email. And so I don't know if many of you have been submitting recently, but we've been requesting that you put an email address on your application so that we can contact you if there is a need for any issues or queries to be brought to your attention. So that way we hope to at least circumvent the mailing system, which is non-existent and which would have taken days to get to you if you had the proper mailing address on your application. And so that is an area we're hoping that will help us in speeding up the review. I think also sometimes with applications, we don't get adequate information, even from the beginning, just the initial application. And the building code, it outlines that you should have your site plan, location plan, survey drawing, and just the basic items, setbacks, indicating your setbacks on the property. Many times we have applications come in, the setbacks are missing, and that is cause to hold up your application. So it's important that you try and make sure that you submit the basic information when you submit an application to help speed up the process.
Mr. Delancey, you mentioned resource limitations inside your department, right? I know the minister talked about it, but it seems like there's a wonderful opportunity for third-party inspections.
Well, as the minister mentioned, we are looking at that now. In fact, we've looked at it for a few years now, but we are just trying to fine-tune it and to bring it up to the public or to the practicing engineers and architects for their feedback.
Timeline?
Well, the minister said early January, early in the new year, so that's what we're looking at. So, like I said, we basically have an outline and a format already laid out, and it's just a matter now of having it vetted to make sure from a legal aspect that some of the basic things are there to carry that forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lancy. Mr. Rollins, do you have anything to add to our discussion in regards to, you deal with administrative works all the time. What is your perspective?
Well, I deal with them all the time, so it's going to be very difficult for me to criticize them. I think they're very efficient. I'll qualify that. They're very efficient in finding queries. They're very efficient in finding queries. You know, you submit a set of plans to the Ministry of Works, and it seems like they're expecting to find a perfect document. And no plan will get approved unless you submit a perfect document. So hence the problem. They're looking for a perfect document. The other thing is they're short-staffed severely. The electrical engineers don't have the problem that the structural engineers have, because I think they've got about maybe 7 or 8 inspectors. Yeah. The mechanical ones that do the plumbing, they've got about 3 or 4 inspectors. So they've got a fairly good run. But the structural engineers, we have 1 person. That's so unkind to us. I mean, that 1 person is responsible for checking drawings, and he's very good at finding queries. He can find a bolt that's missing. Anybody who's ever tried to get any plan approved knows that their plan was probably queried, and rightfully so. Every plan on this island has probably been queried, from a single-story wooden building to that lattice. He's queried them all. And he finds good reasons to query them. The problem is when you go to resolve your query, he's out to a seminar, he's probably right here someplace. You know? So that's the problem. If there were 2 of them, 1 person could be back there doing it. You know? If he's not at the seminar, then he'll probably be going on vacation, going home in another couple of weeks. Is that so? But then again, he's probably on site doing an inspection. That is just unreal that in 2018 going to 2019, we have 1 person reviewing every plan that comes through this island. Something ought to be done about that. So am I satisfied with it? Generally, I could say I'm kind of not so satisfied, but I could understand what Mr. Delancey is doing. He's working with what he's got.
Adrian, okay, go ahead, Mr. Land.
I just want to add to that in the sense that, yes, we only have 1 structural engineer who reviews pretty much all of the building structures from 2-story and up. Our engineer, he is quite thorough when it comes to reviewing the applications, structural applications. And I think he does his best in trying to identify those areas that should be seen on the plan, so that when a contractor goes to build, he would have the information available that he can look at to build by. And I think, in all fairness, I think he tries to do his best in making sure that adequate information is on the application, on the approved set of drawings.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on the general subject area, which impacts the entire chain, and it mentions ease of doing business, in particular the rating credit that you alluded to, Mr. World Bank. You know, having interact with them every year in terms of that, one of the things that they look at is not only what happens individually at each agency, but in fact the whole chain of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So as we talk about the subject of ease of doing business, it's also how better can agencies work together, what can be done in parallel to reduce the time, right? So what they're tracking is if an investor comes in and wants power now, well, first of all, they get electrical contractor, who has to fill out the specifications. How long does that take? Is the information correct? Then that spec got to go to the Ministry of Works. The Ministry of Works got to stamp it. Then they got to send it on to BEC. And then if things are missing, et cetera, right? So I think it's one point in terms of within each individual agency, But the other key point is how can we reduce that time frame in order to get it? So I think we also need to focus on that. On electronically, I think you can do a lot by using electronic media as we go forward. But I think we also need to focus on that, not just within the agencies, but across agencies.
Yeah, just a follow-up to Mr. Basin. That is so. With the survey they've been conducting, many times it appears that what we are doing is a lengthy process. What they also look into is how long it takes with physical planning to get a review and so forth. In some jurisdictions, the building permit process is independent to you getting your physical planning or town planning approval. And if that is separate, then you can hold on to that, maybe like how I think town planning does now with their approval in principle. You have 18 months or a year to carry out that project.
2 years.
Then anytime within that 2-year span, then you can apply to buildings control and get your approval. But our system is a one-stop shop where it starts with buildings control, goes through the entire gamut, and ends with buildings control. And all that comes into play in adding up the days.
Mr. Lanzi, in regards to that, it sounds like there is potential to have some parallel processing going on. Like you said, you know, again, I go through this, I live this. Yeah, go ahead.
That is the whole idea behind the electronic plan processing. We would be able to review plans concurrently. When an application is made, it will be automatically sent to pretty much all of the agencies one time. And they would each have the opportunity to review their part of the application.
These agencies, you're talking utility companies as well, in addition, or different realm of?
No, it's more on the building permit approval process.
And if I could too, also just briefly about the time it takes and the overall rating that we have. It's also my understanding from this rating process that the jurisdictions are self-reporting, and there is minimal confirmation, I guess, of the accuracy of the reporting. So if one jurisdiction says that my process takes 2 weeks, it's just taken that it takes 2 weeks. If someone else says my process takes 2 days, it's just taken that it takes 2 days. There's little to no verification or validation of that data. So if we accurately report on the situations that we face, and speaking as a utility that works with other utilities in the region, and you look at how long BPL may report that something takes to get done, and a sister organization might report that they take to get something done, we may have knowledge that, you know, that number may be a bit creative, maybe a bit generous on their side, but that's not necessarily vetted. So the rating is somewhat skewed by that. But having said that, we can all agree that we do need to improve the ease of doing business, but the number may not be exactly as it's reported.
Question in regards to this parallel processing. Also, my understanding is whenever a set of drawings is submitted to Ministry of Works, it is sent to town planning, then it's sent to health, then it's brought back to town plan. I mean, to Ministry of Works, right? Right. So, is it possible, like you said, to have those three processes go at the same time? Town planning, health, and Ministry of Works?
That's the whole idea.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the idea. Okay, I wanted to touch on that, the electronic plan processing, you know, and I was just wondering whether it extended to town plan and. Can you elaborate on this new processing proposal?
Well, to date, we've completed an RFP, and earlier in October, we sent out for expressions of interest. It was sent out by the Department of Information Technology, who is working hand in hand with us. Our first initial invitation, we got no response. We then sent it out again about 2 weeks later, and this time we were able to get responses from 7 different companies. I think 2 were local and the other 5 international. And so with that, we've done a review, an evaluation of those companies, and have sort of tried to evaluate them on a broad spectrum of various requirements, and from the perspective of the Information Technology Department. And we have set a passing mark, and those companies that scored above the passing mark will be issued the invitation to the RFP. That process we hope to have finished and sent out by next week. And the Department of Information Technology is working on that right now to get that together so that it may be issued to those selected few companies. That process, the tendering time would be, I think, another 4 to 6 weeks before we get the returns. Then from there, there's quite a few evaluations would take place. They would have to present what they propose to give us, and all that would have to be tweaked. They have the program, get back to us, and there'll be some back and forth on that. And so we're hoping, we were initially hoping that we would have been able to award a contract by January. That obviously has been pushed back now, and we hope within, before the end of this fiscal year, we would be able to have awarded that contract.
Mr. Delancey and perhaps Mr. Rollins, at the seminar on the electronic plan processing, one of the concerns raised was the subject of electronic stamping of drawings, which I understand probably has some legal ramifications. I'm wondering, can either of you say to us where is that process? Because if the PEB does not allow electronic stamping of the drawings, then the process is still going to be bogged down.
Well, we are actually looking into that now with the Attorney General's office. They have already done preliminary reviews of the various acts, and there is an act concerning digitalization, which is something that they had indicated would be part of, we'll be using that, falling back on that act as far as the electronic processing goes. And so we don't see it as being a setback or a means of delay for the process when it comes about.
On behalf of the PEB, we're prepared to assist in any way we can. Right now, we offer all of our members the regular stamps, but, you know, we'll assist them with providing them with electronic stamps, because, I mean, that's where the world is moving right now, and we wouldn't want to be left out of that.
Adrian, I got a question for you in regards to the Professional Engineers Board. You know, there's always this talk about non-licensed professionals operating in the Bahamas, and I was just wondering what are some of the things the PEB is doing to try and mitigate some of the issues we're having. You know, you hear about the non-licensed professionals coming to our shores and shorts and T-shirts and, you know, and performing professional engineers work. What is your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, well, and certainly speaking from the board standpoint, we are aware of talks about it. However, we can only act if we get a formal complaint from someone. We do issue letters into Bahamian companies, and we request information from them about the status of their engineering processes. Like for Grand Bahama, an example, I think several times we've made visits down to them to check on their plans and to see what they're doing there. We don't have that so much in Nassau or the other islands, because we don't have the nature of the business is not, their businesses are not that way. But persons walking into the Bahamas in briefcase or with their T-shirts and backpacks and the computers, and they're still working. We can only take action against them if someone makes a formal complaint. We would have no way of knowing what they're doing when they come here unless someone complains about it to the board. Your concern is noted, and I'll be looking to you for some assistance with that regard. Thank you.
Mr. Delancey, in regards to the Ministry of Works involvement with ensuring that drawings and projects that require, statutorily requires the involvement of professional engineers, what processes are in place to help ensure that that takes place?
Well, I mean, we do that now, especially in particular with the structural side of it. Any multi-story building has to be submitted under the signature and seal of a licensed architect, and in some instances, the engineer. So we make sure, try to enforce that whenever applications come in or reach at that stage of review, to ensure that the licensed engineers have stamped and sealed the drawings. That also goes for electrical and mechanical systems. Under the building code, it outlines the threshold whereby you have an engineer sign off on the drawings.
The reason I know structural, it's pretty well enforced, but I speak as an electrical engineer, and along with my fellow mechanical engineer colleagues, I don't think it's not as enforced as vigorously. And I was very encouraged by the fact that you reissued the notice reminding where mechanical and electrical and plumbing engineers of records are required. I was just curious as to whether or not if there's a formalized process for those who are reviewing the drawings in the building control department, making sure that the proper engineers' records are in place.
Yeah, they have been advised, and perhaps maybe they need to be reminded of that to make sure to be more vigilant. But normally, when an application goes to some of my engineers, they make sure, look to see whether the design goes over the threshold or not.
Something I've noticed, just because this consideration is my company's license is under the name of my company, but I'm obviously as a registered architect. There's persons we're aware of that obviously, technically, that stamping off on work for just projects, not necessarily where their firms are or companies are specifically involved in the development of these works, but or maybe doing this for some fee. I suppose a consideration could be if you're, I don't know how, if that individual could be tied to a specific entity, and that entity is paying business license fees. There's a better way of tracking the activities of that company as opposed to one just technically just using their stamp and just stamping off on work where if you would check, let's say, the templates of these drawings, their company is not involved at all. They're not even there. There's a person that's literally walking off the boat, coming straight from the plane, going and finding this individual, paying them a fee, and all they're doing is just stamping on the project. And so the ministry is accepting that document because they have this stamp on it, and I assume, I'm not evident of this, but I assume that this person now has submitted some business license that's under this person's name and not a particular firm. And why I ask that is in submitting documents to the Ministry of Works, we've been questioned constantly about the fact that the license that we have in there, our business license, is under my company. We're just the registered architect for our company. It's not submitted, our business license is not submitted under the individual or the registered individual. So my question then is, how is the framework of these business licenses that are at the Ministry of Works, are they just viewed as that individual and that license, and so there's no follow through with the fact that their companies are actually involved in the development of these projects?
Well, the business license, we normally ask for you to show evidence of your business license and your professional license at the beginning of each year.
Which we have.
Right.
But my professional license is granted to my name.
You, yeah,
The business license is granted to my company,
right.
not to my name. So we've been getting pushback as to say that there's no association or no confirmation that I am, because I don't trade as, my company's a limited company, and we're shareholders in the company as the registered architect, so we are participants within that company, but there's no name on my business license specifically for the individual, the registered persons that participating. So I'm trying to understand how are these business licenses that you're holding, how are they registered?
Well, like I said, those are the two items we look for. If we know they're associated with each other, that's fine with us. We don't, we're not in the auditing process of making sure that you are who you are. If you submitted it along with your company's business license, that's all we need.
So it's just the attachment of that license. So my registration stamp can just follow whatever project, whether my company is not involved at all. And so I could not be paying business license.
No, but like I said, at the beginning of the year, we asked for your professional license and your business license. So there must be some connection at that point.
I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you.
I think we could, we have one more question. Quick question.
What requirements are there for insurance, especially liability insurance?
There's none.
Well, there is no requirement for submitting a plan.
We need to look at that, though, you know.
Well, like I said, we're looking at the third-party inspection process, and with that, more than likely, we will be requiring evidence of that.
At the present time, I can tell that there's
No, for submitting an application, a building permit application, we don't ask for that.
Well, thank you. Time is flying. You have one more question? Yeah, okay.
We spoke just earlier about the threshold for the engineers for having stamps. For those who do not know, where can you find that information, the threshold?
You want to go with that, Mr. Lance?
That was an updated one.
Mr. Lockhart, you should be quite familiar with it.
This is a question for everybody.
It's in the Bahamas Building Code, and so the professionals out there, they should have been familiar with the Bahamas Building Code.
Any other questions? I think we could be here all afternoon discussing this topic.
We have an architect and an engineer.
Great.
Persons who are interested in being fully engaging more can join the working group, the working committee that's going to engage after the forum. So just give us your name. We have email addresses out there. So if you just tell us to put you on the list, then we'll contact you. Or you can send an email to BEAPP Bahamas, BEAPP BAHAMAS @gmail.com. And we'll put you on the working committee.
Thank you. I just want to wrap it up real quick. I want to give each of my panelists about 30 seconds to say a few words, and before we wrap it up.
Ladies first.
So I guess if I'm going to use my 30 seconds, one thing that I would like to talk about is really procurement. We have in the utility industry very, very long lead time items. Transformers right now are running 48 weeks. And I think that the perception is, I gave you my money, and 2 months from now, I want all my stuff. So it's something that we, I think as an organization, need to do a much better job at, is educating our end users on exactly how long these long lead time items are. And so as we enter into the Christmas holidays, everybody wants to move into their house, and everybody's like, I want it, I want it, I want it now. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do all of that work. So just something to consider as you go out and you have your own end-use customers. Think about how long our lead times are in order to prepare to provide service to customers.
I presume that none of you is involved in any project that has started and doesn't have a building permit. That's rhetorical.
Yeah.
That is a problem with the town planning committee, where folks say, oh, I submitted my building permit, and they get a number, and they say, oh, I have a building permit. And they start construction. And they will call the architect's name or the engineer's name. I have an open door policy. We have limited staff, but we want to be your partners, not your adversaries. And these large projects, you can always come in and we can have a talk. We have a Section 7 under the Act whereby we have the discretion to process the straightforward building permit applications, so there's less time involved in that. With the electrical system, it will even be shorter. Great. But we're your partners.
Thank you so much. Mr. Lansing?
Yes, I'd just like to add that to assist us in trying to execute your building applications, that you please try and make sure that you submit the basic requirements that is outlined in the code. And also with large-scale projects, like Mr. Zonical mentioned, if you are planning a large-scale project and you know it may be in an area that may not be zoned for that particular use, to make sure come in advance and discuss it, bring your sketches. Even in my department, especially for complex buildings, we want to make sure that the life safety issues are in compliance with the codes. So it will be advantageous if you come in to us prior to submitting your application, prior to completing a full set of drawings, and discuss it with us so that we would be able to give a preliminary review to make sure that when you do submit that final application, it wouldn't be pushed around back and forth.
Thank you, Mr. Lansing. Mr. Rollins?
I'd like to use my 30 seconds to let Mr. Lansing know and Mr. Sonical know that I apologize for anything that I've said. That might seem like a construction. The approval process does take too long. Anybody that wants to build a home or comes here as an investor, I mean, we all work with them, so we all understand, and I'm sure we can appreciate that the ease of doing construction in the Bahamas could be a lot easier. I'd hope that with these changes that is coming up, that we can work towards that end. Thank you.
So thank you, panelists, and thank you all. Great panel.